We are hurting American manufacturing and jobs. We are putting a bias against making things in America in the tax code.
Some ideas are so stupid, only an intellectual could believe them. This is a theory wrapped in speculation inside a guess. Nobody knows for sure what will happen.
Two Republican leaders, House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Tom Cotton, disagreeing sharply about a key element of tax reform, a border adjustment tax. And we're back now with the panel. Well, let's start with President Trump's legislative accomplishments so far. At this point in 2009, let's put it up on the screen, Congress had passed the Obama stimulus package, which Rush just told us wasn't a stimulus, a measure enforcing equal pay, and expanded the children's health insurance program. But now, Kim, Republicans are still arguing, and we saw it there, about tax reform. They're still arguing and seem in some form of disarray about Obamacare repeal and replace. And there's a lot of complaints from Republicans about a lack of guidance from the Trump White House.
I actually couldn't disagree more. And I think this is one point where Trump actually has a point about some of the coverage. All these endless stories saying that House Republicans are in disarray. They're not. They're going to come back after this presidential recess. They're going to present a consensus plan for Obamacare that's going to include a lot of really major changes, not just
what about the differences? And I mean, you know, you've got differences about Medicaid expansion and what happens to that money, whether you're going to pay for this, what the cost is going to be, what the access is going to be.
Well, right, because they're taking their time to deliberate this. I mean, you mentioned the stimulus bill. The reason that was passed so quickly is because President Obama said, do this, and everyone in the Democratic Congress said, great, we'll jump how high. There was no deliberation, and it ended up not being a very good bill because no one spent a lot of time on it. And one other thing, too, I mean, whether or not you think that the Trump administration is working like clockwork, the House and the Senate have been remarkable. They have passed, the House has passed more than 12 disapproval resolutions of various different Obama last-minute regulations. 3 of those have gone through the Senate. The president has signed 2 of them. And Mitch McConnell in the Senate has been running cloture votes like you wouldn't believe. We finally got Mitch Mulvaney confirmed this week for OMB, Scott Pruitt. So in the face of enormous Democratic intransigence, I think they've been accomplishing a great deal.
So, Chuck, am I all wrong when I talk about the slow start legislatively for the Trump White House?
Well, yes and no.
Well, at least I batted 50%.
Yeah, well, I always say that, you know. Look, it's not so much the number of the bills, it's the content of the bills. And it's true that at the beginning of the Obama administration, you had this very major legislation, but the one thing those all had in common were they were giving things. They were spending money. They were, you know, and what the Trump and GOP agenda is, let's face it, taking things away in the sense of eliminating Obamacare or, you know, overhauling the tax code. It's a much more complicated operation by its nature. What that little soundbite you showed of Tom Cotton versus Paul Ryan demonstrated was that this border adjustment tax plan for corporate taxation that's been germinating in the House was always going to be a heavy lift in the Senate. There was always a lot of pushback.
And the border adjustment is the idea that you're going to tax imports coming into the country, but you're not going to tax exports, and thereby supposedly that you're going to create more of a market for jobs here in this country.
Yes, and guess who is located in Arkansas and is dead set against that idea? That would be Walmart, which gets almost all of its, not all, but a lot of its merchandise from China. And Tom Cotton, of course, represents them. And that's the dynamic of the Senate. But I just want to make this point. At some point, you would think that once the spectacle of bashing the media and traveling around the country and holding 77-minute rambling press conferences is over, people are going to want to see something in the form of concrete legislation and something from the president in terms of plan, and they're going to have to present that at some point.
President Trump says that part of the problem is that his staff is so busy putting out fake news media fires that they're not having trouble doing their work to help the people. Here he is from his news conference this week.
When the media lies to people, I will never, ever let them get away with it. I will do whatever I can that they don't get away with it. They have their own agenda, and their agenda is not your agenda.
Well, obviously that wasn't the news conference, that was the rally, but it was the same message, Karl. And I want to ask you, and you know, be honest, tell me if you think I'm overreacting about the president's tweet on Friday that the fake media is not my enemy, it's the enemy of the American people.
Yeah. Well, enemy of the American people, that's a term we used for the Axis powers and the Viet Cong and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Taliban. I think it was over the top and unnecessary and a furtherance of this administration's bigger problem. The bigger problem is not the fake news stories. The bigger problem is that they don't have a narrative. Rush touched on this. They don't have a narrative that is based in the reason why they got elected. 1/3 of the American people thought the country was going in the right direction. They voted for Hillary Clinton. 2/3 of the American people thought the country was off on the wrong track, and a majority of them, a substantial majority, voted for Donald Trump. 52% of the people in the exit polls said the #1 issue was the economy. 18% terrorism, 13% immigration, 13% foreign policy. They elected him because they want the economy to be stronger, to create more jobs and bigger paychecks. And to the degree that he spends his time, as he did in that Friday news conference, it was rock 'em, sock 'em. They had a lot of fun. He probably felt great after that. But what he missed was the opportunity to say to the American people, I'm focused on jobs, growing our economy, making your paychecks better, making your communities safer, making your future more prosperous for you and your kids. And a president has a brief period of time at the beginning of their administration to create a narrative. And I'm afraid that by focusing so much on these leaks, as unfair as they may be, but he ought to be careful about unnamed sources, and he ought to be careful about he's the guy who, on the basis of unnamed sources, said President Obama was not born in the United States, and that 9/11 was an inside job. So be careful about this. Why don't you stay focused on the things that the American people really care about and use the enormous abilities you got and the channels of communication to carry that message?
We only got a minute left, Mo. I got to say, presidents do complain, and as I pointed out with Reince Priebus, I mean, Barack Obama was pretty unappealing. Pretty, I thought, offensive in his constant whining about Fox News.
Look, and I guarantee you, my friends on Hillary Clinton's campaign didn't necessarily believe that the media was in their corner during most of the campaign, with the focus on her emails and a lot of the challenges that she faced. So yes, there is a natural amount of push and pull with the press. But as Karl said, I mean, using this type of language, turning people against entire institutions that are the bedrock, that are part of the bedrock of our democracy, is dangerous. And this president does have an opportunity right now. He's a master communicator. He's able to drive a conversation and a narrative unlike many others. Use that to push his message. Use that to tell the people what he wants to do. He's not doing that.
Well, on that rare moment of praise for Donald Trump from you, Mo, thank you. Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.